Girl, why are you using...
I know you don't like my filters, but I'm just trying to protect my audience from my ugly, so give me a break.
Feeling feisty, huh?
Maybe. Enjoy the show. Greetings, Smarties. First, I know the ring light is reflecting and I'm sorry. Second, drop me a comment. What's your favorite detective movie or book? Today, we're talking about The Thin Man by Dashiell Hammett. This is the only Thin Man novel he wrote, but he did write 2 sequels for MGM. All 6 movies are available through different streaming services for a low rental fee or sometimes for free with ads. But we had trouble streaming some of them, so my husband found the Blu-rays on barnesandnoble.com for less than $10 per movie. MGM didn't expect the first movie to be a huge success, but then they capitalized on the audience reaction by having Hammett write the next 2 movies with the married screenwriting team Albert Hackett and Goodrich. Those screenplays are actually in this collection. After Hammett's health failed from alcohol and gonorrhea, Hackett and Goodrich took over writing the last 3 movies. Finishing the last 2 movies proved difficult because Myrna Loy worked with the Red Cross for a time, and it was hard for MGM to get her back. And William Powell took a break from acting after he lost his wife, Jean Harlow, to kidney failure. More behind-the-scenes details are explored in the collection Return of the Thin Man. I also have a video about that. The title, Thin Man, originally referred to the victim in the very first novel, but then became attached to the detective, Nick Charles. First, we'll talk about the author's writing style, then compare the movie to the book. Writing style. The novel is written in first person. Mystery is a good genre for that perspective because you can keep secrets from the audience, since we're only learning things as the lead is able to learn them. I know there's a plethora of reasons to pick a certain perspective, but that's the first reason that came to my mind. I love Hammett's concise method of summarizing conversation. I know everything gets better with practice, but I feel like if I tried this method, at first I bet it would either look pretentious or it would accidentally be confusing. Take a look. Hammett uses the adverb slowly a lot. He said dryly, then very slowly. She said slowly. Macaulay asked slowly. I replied slowly. While it surprised me how often this dialogue tag is used, it is helpful in imagining how the speaker is talking. There are a lot of people to keep up with in the novel, a lot of different names, but that's common for some mystery novels, and the characters are so different the further you get into the story, the easier they are to keep track of. The dialogue is quick and immediately reveals who the characters are and what their problems are, so the plot can get moving. I know it's silly, but on page 28, Hammett says, "The doorbell rang," and I couldn't help but think of the Nero Wolfe novel of that name. The Charleses' attitudes and personalities shine through their dialogue and actions, as well as their unique reactions. In chapter 8, when they're facing a danger, Nick narrates, "I looked at Nora. She was excited, but apparently not frightened. She might have been watching a horse she had bet on coming down the stretch with a noselead." We can imagine Myrna Loy's gorgeous visage as she stares in wonder while something crazy is happening. On page 23, there's a dialogue confusion when Mimi asks about where Clyde might be. Nick answers, but then Mimi starts talking in the same paragraph. And on page 83, another confusing arrangement of dialogue happens. Maybe I'm just dumb, well, yeah, but it was hard for me to keep track of which man was speaking because their dialogue was mashed together instead of on separate lines. To be fair, maybe it was a stylistic choice. And it's a good reminder for me to make my manuscript as easy to read as possible because while I want my 2-part mystery to surprise the audience, I don't want it to ultimately confuse anyone. There's a great jab at sensationalism in media after Nick gets attacked. Morelli, it seemed, had shot me. Twice for one of the papers and 3 times for another. Unrelated note, it was at this point that I realized Morelli sounds like Norelli, like Andrew Norelli, one of my favorite comics. When Nick sees a policeman admiring Nora, I wondered if Hammett meant to repurpose the word solemn back to back. I'm kind of leaning towards yes, it was probably for a deliberate effect, but I don't know. He shook his head solemnly. His voice was solemn. "By God, sir, you're a lucky man." Honestly, I'm not sure I'd want to replace either of those with a different word. Even though modern writers are told to use variety and cut adverbs and adjectives as much as possible, I think these 2 work well in this case. Nora keeps telling Nick, "You're an old Greek fool, you're a Greek louse," etc. And Nick offers an explanation about what his Greek first name really is, but we're not sure if he's joking. The N-word is used as slang on page 82. Of course, as an 80s baby, I found it offensive, but I had to remember 90 years ago when this was written, there were some social circles where the word would have been used normally and not used to be rude or shocking. But it also might have been Hammett's way of making the reader not like this particular character because no one else uses the word. The way Hammett talks about Nunheim, his nose was peculiarly limber, a long, drooping nose. I thought about those funny Borzoi videos.
Let me do it for you.
I love how he paints Nick as a pretty relaxed person. Even though he sometimes has a lot on his mind, of course, he's very chill. It's even evidenced in little physical moments. I did not have to rise to put out a foot and trip him. He handles the situation so leisurely, it reminds me of Archie Goodwin. In chapter 20, Nick says, "I told her, almost word for word, what had been said and done at Mimi's. I don't believe it," she said. "You made it up. What's the matter with them? Are they the first of a new race of monsters?" That's how I feel sometimes. My word, when you find out how much sadness people are putting into other people's lives, you're just thinking, stop it, get some help. Many of the female characters, whether they're married or not, wealthy or not, are presented as gold diggers, usually duplicitous, and have low standards in their relationships. They don't seem to have full, satisfying lives, except Nora. Even though she doesn't work, she has a full social life, a solid marriage, and the book makes her shine in contrast with the other characters. So I don't want to think that the cornucopia of negative female characters is a sign of sexism from the author. I think it's a method to make one character stand out from the rest. Not to mention, many of the male characters are awful too, compared to Nick. Are there two Alices? Dorothy has an Aunt Alice, the sister who often disagrees with Clyde. And Dorothy is hanging out with Harrison Quinn, who's married to a lady named Alice. What? Finding out that the cops beat up a suspect before letting him out of jail, Nora sounds as naive as I am. Nora said indignantly, "That's horrible. You mean they really..." I patted her hand. Nora turned to me. "Did you do things like that?" "Who, me?" I do love how coy Nick acts. He might be hiding something, or he might not. Nick says this about Mimi. "When you catch her in a lie, she admits it and gives you another lie to take its place." Who here knows people like that and is tired of them? The ending wraps up with Nick explaining to Nora how the investigation was conducted, rather than bringing the reader through the process in an action sequence. In parentheses, Hammett tells us several future details, like later we found that this was only red paint, or later a lady said she knew the criminal by a different name. As a reader, I might have preferred an action sequence, watching Nick solve the crime, except Hammett does such a good job writing fun dialogue, and telling instead of showing does save time. By the way, I know that the complicated way the criminal covers his tracks makes sense to more educated people, but I had to reread lines, and then I understood it. It was throwing me for a loop. I can tell I wasn't born to be a criminal mastermind. The way you have to work so hard to be dishonest, it isn't worth it. How the book compares to the movie. In the first film, we meet supporting cast first, but in the novel, we meet the lead right away. I was leaning against the bar in a speakeasy on 52nd Street. Of course he was. Waiting for Nora to finish her Christmas shopping. That is so Nora, am I right? Asta the dog is a girl. Why did they change that for the movies? The book describes a victim as bullet-riddled, whereas the movies always presented the birders as more simple and quick. Just one bullet or one stabbing and immediate collapse. So it's interesting to me how much less violent movies used to be, even if there was violence. Like in the films, Nick can't remember the names of people that Nora invites over. He just knows they're some of her more erudite or aristocratic friends. Just like in the movies, Nick and Nora can have two conversations at once. For example, she asks him about a secretary who lived with an employer, and he's asking her for a drink. "Why don't you have some breakfast first? Was she in love with him or was it just business?" "I don't know. It's too early for breakfast." Nick and Nora are playful together like we see in the films. They make faces at each other, tease one another, and Nora tells Nick to shut up. It might seem weird if you haven't read or watched the stories, but they really are a sweet couple. In the films, Nick and Nora do seem to have an age gap, but probably only about 10 years, whereas in the book, it's 15. Nick is 41 and Nora is 26. Nick jokingly asks her, "What were you doing on the night of October 5th, 1902? And Nora says, "I was just a gleam in my father's eyes." So maybe the movie is kidding, or maybe it's telling us that she's about 31 or 32, since the movie was released in 1934. By the way, the films always have that I Love Lucy bedroom setup with the separate beds, but in the book, ooh la la, it's insinuated that the husband and wife are sleeping together. Mimi's husband Chris is described as a dark man with thick Teutonic accent, yet the movie version is just a Caucasian guy who's humorously oversensitive. However, in older stories, saying someone is dark sometimes only meant the hair color. When I got to chapter 8, a sequence plays out exactly like in the movie. I started wondering why the movie sometimes pulls directly from the book, while other times the screenplay rewrites scenes, combines scenes, or even writes new ones. Honestly, I think the whole novel would have been entertaining as is, adapted verbatim, but I guess the screenwriters had a different vision for the story that they thought would be more appealing to the audience. I have to say, in general, they did fine. But the whole beginning of the movie throws me because we don't meet Nick and Nora for like 10 whole minutes. I wonder, did the screenwriters know how popular and beloved those characters were, so they kind of held them back like a reward for sitting through the beginning scenes? However, on page 54, a policeman tells Nick about the last time the missing man Clyde Wynant was seen. This discussion is probably what the screenwriters based the opening sequence of the movie on. A lot of information is revealed in this conversation on the page, so the screenwriters might have decided it was less confusing for the audience to watch the action play on screen immediately instead of listening to it later. The domestic abuse is worse in the book. From the screen adaptation, my husband and I would not have guessed that this particular mother was that violent. In the film, she's greedy and moody, but she only slaps her daughter once. In chapter 25, Nick and Nora actually prevent Mimi from attacking her daughter right in front of them. I kind of admire Hammett for showing us that domestic violence isn't always at the hands of a man. Nick tells Mimi's son Gilbert that bullets and knife wounds don't hurt right away, and Hammett explains it as if he knows personally. I remembered he worked at Pinkerton National Detective Agency before writing, so I was thinking, Mr. Hammett, what have you been through? Nick lets Gilbert read from a book about a very bloody account of a crime. It was unpleasant. I wondered why Hammett included it because it 100% has nothing to do with the story. And yes, it was from a real book called Celebrated Criminal Cases of America, published in 1910. Maybe making us read that part was meant to show us more about Gilbert's psychology, because when he's done, he tells Nick it's interesting, but that he understands why the criminal did what he did. This does show us that Gilbert's a little crazy and a little jaded. A cop uses the same wording in the film and the novel. Wynant's tried to commit suicide in Allentown, Pennsylvania. My husband made a valid point. Tried to is a misleading term because the person they find is deceased. The Charleses and a lot of other characters jump from club to club and theater to theater, much like characters you'll see in a P.G. Wodehouse novel or Rex Stout. Usually the ones doing the club hopping are wealthy, so they feel like they've seen it all and they feel blasé. This also reminded me of how Dorian Gray's acquaintances acted in Oscar Wilde's novel. I also have a review of that. In my opinion, the movie did retain some of the funniest lines straight from the novel. Like when Miriam tells Nunheim, "I don't like crooks, and even if I did, I wouldn't like crooks that are stool pigeons. And if I liked crooks that are stool pigeons, I still wouldn't like you." In the book, Dorothy gets involved with a married man who's a sloppy, drunk loser, whereas at the very beginning of the movie, we meet her and her unmarried fiancé. Mimi might be more attractive in the novel than in the movie. On screen, everything about her, from her blinding platinum bleached hair to her whiny voice, is entirely off-putting to the other characters and the audience. Yet in the book, she seems like a borderline Black Widow. One of the cops finds her attractive, and she even has a possible romantic history with Nick. In chapter 25, Nora reveals some details that she noticed about Gilbert, Dorothy, and Studsy. While she is smart in the movies, certainly far from being ignorant, Nick is set up to be the real clever one. Chapter 26, and all through the book actually, including specifically page 184, gives us a very good example of why using AI to determine if a manuscript is AI generated is very unwise. It's purported that literary agents and publishers use AI to scan and find certain punctuation oddities that are common in AI manuscripts. Oddities like the habit of overusing parentheses or ellipses or em-dashes. Case in point, look at all these em-dashes in the dialogue between Macaulay and Nick. 90 years before the big AI addiction swept our world, Hammett used M-dashes a lot, and I like them too. I have every AI feature turned off on my laptops. Long story short, can we just stop using any AI in book creation? If we have a story in our souls, we can ask for help putting it on paper from a human being. We can figure out how to tell it organically, and the publishing industry can stop dealing with their paranoia in counterproductive ways. Hola! Just reminding y'all that my videos aren't sponsored, so I'm sorry if there are ads. That's not up to me. Also, please look up the Drunken Fish Writers Group podcast for more literary fun. Beyond their little jokes and japes and making faces at each other, we get a glimpse of how Nick views Nora, literally and figuratively. In chapter 25, he looks at her while he's fending off two annoying people. Her face was very live. I saw it clearly, sharply. Everything else was blurred. I feel like the movies did a good job putting this mental focus into the way the characters treat each other. They really are devoted to their marriage, which is very sweet. We're shown that devotion in little moments in the book, and the movies turn those little moments into unmistakable qualities in the characters. On page 29 are the first mentions of Mimi having bonds from Clyde, whereas the movie mentions them much sooner, which makes more sense. Compared to the great revelatory segment of chapter 30, I appreciated the quirky way that the movie rewrote Nick's confrontation of the criminal. Every Thin Man movie ends with a group discussion, like a "I suppose you wonder why I called you all here tonight" kind of Agatha Christie classical mystery novel ending. That running theme is really entertaining, but to be fair, the book makes us appreciate how fast Nick's mind works in having him break everything down in just one page. In the novel, it's not Nick and Asta who find the deceased person, but Guild does emphasize that the victim wouldn't have been found if Nick hadn't kept saying that someone needed to search the shop. Also, the condition of the victim is more gruesome than in the film. However, when the cops in the novel talk about the buried clothing they found, Nick puts everything together instantly, much like in the film. As opposed to the dinner sequence in the movie where all is revealed to all the characters, in the book, Nick's exposition is only given to Nora. And the last line of the novel, of course, is a snippy reply from Nora. After Nick explains everything, she says, "That may be, but it's all pretty unsatisfactory." So which one is better? To be honest, out of appreciation for the origin of the characters and the story that inspired all 6 movies, I do prefer the book. But for the enjoyment of following Nick and Nora over and over, I prefer the movies. But in a way, they're kind of equal, to me, because Hammett co-wrote the screenplays, and you notice how true they are to the characters. In conclusion, I highly recommend either one. Watch the movies, read the book. Either way that you choose to spend time with Nick and Nora Charles, the stories will be intriguing, funny, and mysterious. If you love these stories, also check out my review of the collection called Return of the Thin Man. Let's all remember together, compassion is love plus action. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day. Bring me your big face. Yes, oh, it is what I'm talking about. Yes. Have you ever wondered how Nick and Nora met? Pick up Christopher Allen's novel, Before the Thin Man, and feel free to watch my review of his book.